Hey everyone, it's Natalie Bencavanga, and welcome to another edition of Facts Over Fear. If you've been following me for a while, you know that I love to look at things on a national level, and then I also love to hone in on local politics and local races. And right now, we're going to be doing just that because local politics doesn't always make the headlines, but it really is so important in everyone's day-to-day lives. It shapes everything from your water quality to your paycheck. So today, we're going to be zooming in on Pennsylvania's 50th legislative district. This district covers all of Greene County and portions of Washington County, including roughly 24 municipalities in the southeastern part of the county here in Pennsylvania. Republican Bud Cook currently holds that seat and is representing that district. But he has a new challenger, which I'm really excited to introduce, Lois Bower-Bjornson. She is a small business owner and environmental advocate and is running for the Democratic nomination, bringing a background in grassroots organizing and clean air advocacy to the race. So what does she stand for? Where is she on the positions? And what does this race say about where local politics and the Democratic Party are headed right now? So let's get into it. Lois, thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. I was just saying before we started, our lives have intersected over the years. And just a fun little fact, everybody, before we dive in. Lois and I have actually known each other since I was 15 years old. And I used to take dance classes. She was my dance teacher down at CLO downtown. And I reconnected with Lois many years later when I was doing a project called Heating Up, focused on talking with thought leaders around the dinner table about environmental justice topics. And you were one of the people that was actively involved in the environmental space. So, oh my gosh, it's just amazing that our universes just keep colliding. It's so cool.
It really is. Yes, it is. Great.
But enough of that. Let's really get into it. So I spoke a little bit to your backstory, but of course I want to hear from you. You really built a career around environmental advocacy and your work as a small business owner. Can you talk a little bit about your backstory and why now? Why did you decide to run for office in this moment?
Well, I mean, as far as my backstory, I live and I grew up in Washington County, Pennsylvania. I was born in Columbus, Ohio. My
Mm-hmm.
mother's from there, so I have a large family in Columbus. I like to say I'm from the tri-state area, and then I went to school at West Virginia University, where my father was a professor for over 30 years. But as far as my backstory, we moved back to Washington County. I can't believe it's been like 21 years for now. Um,
Wow.
you know, 21 years and four kids later. So, yeah, three boys and a girl. So, but it's something that I always wanted to do. But I wanted to do it at a certain time period. With having four children, you just can't decide to run for office and,
Right.
who's going to raise your kids and that type of thing. But, when we moved back to the area, I just was concerned with what was happening here and within just local levels and in the environment and our water issues and things like that were going on. And, I just wanted to see what was happening. And so I thought, in my environmental work, I do go to Harrisburg and I speak with legislators and I've spoken with the current representative numerous times and,
Hmm.
on a lot of these different issues. So it was just something that was always, you know, with me. And,
Yeah.
a few meetings and things like that. And I thought, I know so much about what's happening in my area and I live here and I'm in the area all the time. I thought it's time to do this. And so
Mhm.
it was really just the right time. It was the right place. It was the right moment. And I just, decided that I'm going to throw my hat in and run.
And you mentioned, that you live and work in this area. Can you talk about how it's shaped your priorities, the region that you're in, and any personal connection you've had to the environmental issues plaguing this part of the country?
Sure. Well, when we moved back to the area at the time, I had two small children, and then we had two more children, and the fracking boom was upon us, and frankly, I started to see things in my area that were concerning. Whether it was a tree looking like it was on fire, and it was there was a flare going off, or one of the most prominent memories I have is walking out of my porch and looking to the right and thought the ridge was on fire
Mm.
and it was a holding pond being burnt off. So, and these were just 30 feet high flames. pushing around, and, I just was like, this is wrong. This is wrong what is happening."
Hmm.
And then, my children started to have some health impacts from the fracking industry. I don't like air conditioning, so I always kept my windows, open at night, and that was
Hmm.
detrimental. A couple of my children had such bad nosebleeds that when they would go to school, they would say to their teacher, "Don't tell my mom I had another nosebleed," this type of thing.
Oh.
So, and one of the real clinchers was when my father called me at one point and said, "Lois, I see trucks lined up on the riverbank all day long, every day." He said 15 and 20 trucks, and there's hoses going into the river. So that was really the push to, I would say, get involved. On a level that was surpassing what, I could just do myself. So, and now I'm fortunate enough to be on staff with Clean Air Council, but I work with a lot of different organizations, both, on state, local, and federal levels.
Let's talk a little bit about the Clean Air Council. How do you translate environmental advocacy into legislation that could directly impact people's lives? Because I think it's a difficult transition that I think a lot of people make from sort of the advocacy side into the legislative side, especially from what I've heard when I've had people on and they realize how slowly the wheels of government turn. And I know you're seeing it from the one side, but what are your thoughts if you were to be able to represent the people on the other side?
Well, I mean, I call it threading the needle, right? You have to learn
Hmm.
how to thread the needle. And a lot of that's done by, you know, simply taking people into offices and letting people tell their stories about really what happens to them and what's happening to their communities, and sitting with legislators. I would go to meetings and, Harrisburg and DC, and you could take photos and you could take pictures and you could take videos even. And my children even testified numerous times in both
Mm.
Harrisburg and DC. I mean, we used to laugh. I thought they knew Harrisburg better than they knew their own house to a certain degree. But, but you get to a point where you're right, you do become frustrated, and so I implemented something called Frackland Tours, where I
Mm.
brought legislators out and still bring legislators out. I'm actually, bringing one out, in correlation with another a group that I work with next week, so
Mhm.
they could actually see it for themselves. Now that is something that can't be unseen,
Yeah.
so, I'm able to get them to speak to landowners and, leaseholders that, the well pad is on their property so that they can tell them their health impacts and what is happening with them. And then the tour has expanded over the years to include the whole line of fracking clear to the petrochemical hub, even into the landfills where fracking waste is dumped.
Bef-
So yes, go ahead.
No, no. Before we move on to the next question, I just wanted to get a little more on this topic in terms of clarity. Once a legislator sees with their own eyes and experiences it, has a chance to talk to people, has it moved them, perhaps people that were more skeptical of the real impacts of fracking? Or what have you noticed by doing that?
Well, I mean, it definitely changes them.
Hmm.
These are private tours. There's no media present or anything like that. But people are changed after coming on
Hmm.
these tours and talking to folks and seeing this infrastructure up close and seeing what, unfortunately, people are living next to, and seeing the impacts from that. It does change them. So
Yeah.
I would like to think that some of those tours and some of the interviews and, um, just the folks that they got to talk to did at least change their perspective. And as
Hmm.
far as moving legislation in the government, that's always minority versus majority. So it depends on where we are with that line too. But I know, from my own personal experience, that I know that this definitely does change legislators.
Absolutely. If you're just joining me, I'm Natalie Bencivenga. I'm chatting with Lois Bower-Bjornson, who is running for the Democratic ticket on the 50th district here in Pennsylvania. I was just looking at some of my notes because you said so many good things. I wanted to make sure I hit some of these. Let's talk a little bit about the minimum wage because this is a huge issue that's impacting. It's Women's History Month. Women are already falling further and further behind. The wage gap actually got worse this year. And they keep trying to pass the minimum wage here in Pennsylvania. It keeps failing. It hasn't budged since 2009. That's 15 years. What's your position? And more importantly, how do you think it would actually get passed in a divided legislature like we have right now?
Well, I think the minimum wage needs to be raised, right? People need to have a living wage. It's ridiculous that it's still, it's $7.35 an hour. I mean, it doesn't even comprehend. I mean, if you go to a fast food restaurant, they're going to pay you $15 an hour. So, I
It's
think
actually even less, Lois. It's $7.25
25
an hour.
cents. Yeah,
Yes,
yeah,
yeah.
okay, sorry about that. But I think that's how far it is out of my head. Like, I don't even
Mhm.
understand.
Right,
I know that, like, my daughter at 16 can go get a job and make more money than that.
right.
So, it's really ridiculous. I don't understand the battle that we're having between that. I don't know how that doesn't help people. I don't know how that doesn't make us more prosperous. I doesn't know
Mhm.
don't understand how that doesn't make people want to work and make more money.
Right.
Um, I think that even small companies that worry about, keeping up with larger companies and giant corporations. I mean, my husband has a small business. He's always paid above minimum wage.
Yeah.
So, it's doable. I think it's just simply a stop guard for people to say, no, we're just not going to do that. Um,
Mhm.
and with the legislator the way that it is, I can't pretend like I have a magic wand and say how this is going to go through. I think that there's been fantastic arguments for raising the minimum wage. I don't understand why people are not moving forward with that.
Yeah. And I mean, if you were to win, this seat would flip from a Republican hold to a Democratic one. So it continues to increase that majority and increase pressure to like you said, sort of push things forward. I want to talk about paid leave in the Family Care Act. This is something that has been very near and dear to me as I've seen this legislation finally get a vote. It just got through the House yesterday. This is a huge step forward for paid leave at the state level, and it includes people like myself who would be self-employed, small business owners, people that have really historically been excluded from the ability to stay home if they are sick, if they're taking care of a loved one. There's a million reasons, if they, maternity, paternity leave, all kinds of reasons that people might need to utilize this. Do you support the bill as it is, and what would you push to strengthen it before it were to become law? How much have you sort of taken note of the Family Care Act?
Well, I mean, I'm self-employed. I've been self-employed my entire life. I started to work at 13 years old and I have 4
Mhm.
kids. And I can remember having to say, okay, I'm going to save for 3 months to pay for my own health insurance, make sure I had enough, for groceries or utilities. My husband's also self-employed. So we did that juggle. And
Mhm.
how it would have been so wonderful if I could have had a year off with each one of my children.
Mm.
And I couldn't do that, right? I
Yeah.
think I would have been a far better parent,
Mhm.
if I
Mhm.
could have done that. I think it's so needed. I think, full steam ahead on this. This is ridiculous that we don't have it. Other countries have things like this, and people are able to survive and be okay.
Yeah.
And and no one is going broke because they gave people some leave that is much needed.
Mhm.
I mean, I'm 100%, support of it, 100%.
Let's talk about healthcare affordability. We're seeing people skipping meals at this point to afford their healthcare. What's your plan at the state level to bring down costs? Do you support expanding things like public options? I mean, I think what we've seen at the federal level, the cruelty of policy choice in cutting ACA, cutting people off from Medicaid, really destroying people's ability to survive. And then seeing premiums skyrocket. Here in Pennsylvania, a lot of people don't really make the connection that Penny is our version of quote unquote Obamacare, or where we would go onto the ACA marketplace. And so I want to connect that dot in case you didn't realize Penny is the ACA. Can you talk a little bit about that impact of not having that, and how would you, if elected, try to move that towards more humane and sensible healthcare policy?
Well, again, I'm self-employed. This is the first time in my entire career, that I have the help of the Clean Air Council to help me with my health insurance. The first time
Hmm.
ever. But
Hmm.
my premiums just went up $400 a month.
Wow.
So that's just myself alone, and I insured my whole family.
Sure.
So, it's still very expensive. a monthly total is very expensive,
Hmm.
in the thousands, and that's with having some help on this. Um, I don't understand why we do not have universal health care. This is simply a way to separate the rich from the poor.
Hmm.
It is simply to push people down instead of helping them up. I mean, every study that you look at, every other country that you look at, universal healthcare does not bankrupt countries. It helps people. But as long as healthcare is privatized and there's a profit to be made, unfortunately, we're going to be in this boat.
Yeah.
So, it's really, as you had mentioned earlier, looking at other sources and other resources. And yes, you're right, Penny. I mean, my oldest son benefited from Penny. He's going to be 25 in, May. My second's 22. They're still all under my insurance, but at the same time, if they weren't or they were living in another state, even my 19-year-old at this point, but, and those were reasonable. They were very reasonable for, my oldest son to be on. It was an affordable coverage that
Hmm.
they could have. So it's a struggle I've had my entire adult life. I remember
Yeah.
my father saying, "You need health insurance," and I said, "No, I can't afford it."
Yeah.
So, and right now it's a struggle, and the cost is exuberant. But as long as we are still separating the rich from the poor, and the class is out,
Yeah.
and it's privatized for wealth instead of helping people, unfortunately, it's where we're going to be.
Yeah, I mean, I'm in the same boat. When I used to work at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, that was the only chunk of time for 6 years that I had health insurance, and as a self-employed person, I've been using Penny Obamacare, for a long time, but this is the first year where, I don't have health insurance right now because it skyrocketed so much. It was like another mortgage, and it just wasn't feasible. So I think people misunderstand how many people are using the marketplace. And to your point, and that was a band-aid on a gaping wound. It was not the solution. It was a way to prevent people from literally dying because they couldn't access healthcare. And so I just don't want anybody to get it twisted what all of this comes down to, because you're totally right. It's the haves versus the have-nots. Let's talk a little bit about environmental accountability. All of these things intertwine. We're talking about public health, we're talking about accountability. Let's go back a little bit. You've, like you said, have worked in environmental advocacy. You've experienced firsthand the negative impacts of sort of unfettered capitalism as it relates to the environment. But in a district that is surely tied to energy and industry, how do you balance the inevitable question of jobs while looking at environmental protections without this becoming a false choice?
Well, first of all, you are correct. I mean, there are jobs in the the energy industry, and but I think people need to look at the actual percentage of jobs that there are.
Hmm.
There's a fantastic study out by Ohio River Valley Institute that you can look up, and it will explain the economics of this area, Appalachia, and fracking, and
Yeah.
show you really what is going on. I know for myself, growing up in a coal town, you know, and this isn't to say that coal is fantastic or anything like that. I'm not saying that because we definitely need to move away from fossil fuels. However, when you grew up in a coal town, it sustained the entire town.
Yeah.
Oil and gas does not do that. My father was the only person in town that didn't work in the coal mine, right?
Hmm.
So, so that is not, oil and gas promised us that. They did not deliver on that. So
Hmm.
yes, there are jobs, but they are not employing every single person in a town.
Yeah.
And a lot of the people are coming from other states because they already have that knowledge that they're using in the oil and gas industry from the other states like Texas and Colorado and Oklahoma and things like that. So, it's very similar to the petrochemical hub, the Shell cracker plant that people call it.
Hmm.
It was supposed to be this just godsend and it was going to save people and it had the largest tax break ever that we gave them,
Yeah.
and it employs 400 people. And they violated all of their air quality permits in the first 3 months of operating. They released benzene into the air. And now they're going to have another permit and they're probably going to sell the plant because it was such a great thing. So, so.
I mean, I live close enough to that plant that we feel the environmental impact of it. There are days that we wake up, our eyes are running, our head hurts, we smell it in the air. It's very obvious that the benefits do not outweigh the realities and the consequences. To your point, and 400 jobs is just not a lot when you're looking at what they've promised as an industry.
Right.
I want to dovetail because I feel like the fracking industry, okay, we're sort of, let's say, maybe waning a little bit in that space, but that doesn't mean things are necessarily suddenly better, because now we've got AI data centers that are trying to move in to the state of Pennsylvania. They are expanding really fast all over the country. There's been incredible pushback by communities, and I just want to shout out all the people that are standing up for their communities, for their children's futures, and for their environments, for their livelihoods. Good on you. But they come with huge energy and water demands. What role should Pennsylvania play here? Because we're already hearing this is going to be great for our economy. This is going to be great for jobs. And it's sounding to me as if it is the echoes of the fracking industry's rhetoric. What guardrails need to be put in place? Because Governor Shapiro, he sort of seems to be walking kind of a middle line here. I'm not hearing too much sort of pushback from him around data centers, other than there will be guardrails. I don't really know yet what that's going to evolve into. What are your thoughts on this?
So you're right in a lot of your comments already.
Mhm.
This is what people are calling the next energy boom.
Mhm.
It's very similar to fracking and how fracking was first initially came in like gangbusters, and it
Yeah.
was the greatest thing on the earth, except it's not fracking. Now, the reason that the data centers want to come here in southwestern Pennsylvania, there's actually one slated 2 miles from my house in
Mm.
South Strabane Township. So, and then there's another one that I'm aware of in Greene County that will sit along the Monongahela River and use 18 million gallons of water a day.
A
Um,
day.
a day. And these are
Wow.
these are this is what's happening in communities that people are unaware of. I know that people do not want this in their communities. You don't really want to live next to a data center.
Mm-mm.
There's like a constant noise, a constant humming. There's a different sound level that like you can feel in your chest, like that constantly beats and beats and beats. Now, what makes that even worse is the data centers here in Pennsylvania. So if you're living next to it and you'd have all of those health impacts from just that constant, "Ooh," in your head and humming, is that they want to use natural gas to power data centers. So that's going to further pollute us with
Wow.
more fracking. So that is why they want to be here. So what I recommend that communities do, which again is very difficult, is you have to put an ordinance in for your data centers if they're going to be in your communities. Because if you don't, it's the same thing that happened with fracking. They targeted communities that didn't have proper ordinances and
That's
then
right.
said things like, well, you're not allowing us to operate. Well, they didn't have the ordinance. So we
Right.
see this happening already. And in other states, such as Louisiana and stuff, people are being, the councils and stuff in these small communities are being made to sign non disclosures. And they're saying things like, but it's so private and it's so scientific that we don't want anyone to know what's happening. Well, that's not really informative and that's not being disclosed
Right.
to the community. So, but these are the things that are being told to communities. And unfortunately, what happens in smaller communities is they've come in already and made some sort of deal, and then community members learn about it. So
Mm.
I think we need to slow down and back up. I don't know if that will happen. I hope that it would, because there's a lot going on. But they're looking at the end result, which is a lot of money that will not be for us. It will be for the larger companies that are, the data companies that are doing this.
Mhm.
I was just at a conference and they talked about infiltrating communities, you know, a-
Wow.
and
That's
this,
some language right
yes,
there, Lois.
yes, it is. So
That is intentional
that's not,
language.
yes, and it's not transparent for
No,
sure. If
no.
you want to have a business, be a little transparent.
Yeah. Before we wrap up, I just have a few more thoughts and questions for you. I got to ask you about ICE, because ICE has become a huge issue here in Pennsylvania as a state, in particular in southwestern Pennsylvania, there are a lot of communities in this region that are truly being propped up because of the immigrants that are working and living here. We're now seeing ICE at our airport here in Pittsburgh, which wasn't really met with any resistance. It sort of seemed like all of a sudden here they were earlier this week, and I haven't really heard too much. I've heard a little bit from Sarah Innamorato, our county executive. I haven't been hearing too much from our leadership. And so I want to get your thoughts on ICE in public spaces, ICE in our airports. It's just becoming very visible. So, what role should and can lawmakers at the state level play? And where do you draw the line between federal authority and local impact?
Well, I mean, I don't think that ICE belongs anywhere other than what their job is and what they're supposed to be doing, and we've even seen that that's really a difficult space for them to be in and do it with the deaths of 2,
Hmm.
American citizens that
Hmm.
weren't doing anything, wrong. I have a person that I know whose, um, husband was targeted, and
Mm.
he is a legal citizen, but he was targeted and detained, and he is still being detained.
Mm.
So, this hits home a lot. I think it is sad that people that are in law enforcement, because there's very good law enforcement officials, but I think it's unfortunate that this is happening with ICE and that they're being allowed to come into spaces such as the airports all over the United States when the TSA agents weren't even being paid, but the ICE agents were being paid. So,
Right.
what point are you trying to prove here other than this is a power move?
Yeah.
It's a power move is what it is. And, people are afraid,
Yeah.
rightfully so.
Um, as we wrap up here, and I have so many questions, and there's just never enough time. And I so appreciate you taking time. What makes you different from the other candidates in this race, and why should voters vote for you? I mean, you shared a lot of your platform thoughts on a lot of the issues, but why now is this your moment?
Well, it's time to move southwestern Pennsylvania forward. It's
Hmm.
time to take what we know from our past, our industrial past, build on that with new industries that protect workers and families and communities that we don't have to stop being extracted from and being harmed and left with nothing. So that's one huge chunk of it. And I also want to take us forward into the future. It's time to do something different. The status quo isn't working. Let's move forward, but let's use our knowledge from the things that we did correct and the things that we did wrong and change that and do something better.
When we're looking at knowledge, and that just got me thinking about one more thought here because education has really been under the microscope here in Pennsylvania. There's been a lot of pushback around school vouchers and the further privatization of using our public tax dollars to support that. Where do you stand on that issue? Because I know that is very important to a lot of families here in the city and in around the country, but in particular in Pennsylvania.
Well, I mean, my dad was a college professor for 30 years. He taught education. So he did the placing of the student teachers that came out of, West Virginia University. My brother's a school teacher. I have numerous friends and sister-in-law that's a school teacher and so on and so forth. I think my kids have been in all schools. They've been in public, private, charter, and brick and mortar charter, right?
Mhm.
No system is perfect, right? I think instead of demonizing one system as opposed to the other, we should be working together. But remember, you can't work together if all you're doing is fighting and saying that's terrible and that's terrible. So
Mhm.
I think the point is to work together to try to come up with a solution because we do need help with our schools. We
Mhm.
simply do. It's just that simple. If you talk to any parent, they'll tell you that.
Yeah.
And that's not to say that anything's bad or terrible or wrong, but we need help. So let's stop demonizing one type of learning and another type of learning. We kids learn differently than I've ever learned in my life.
Mhm.
You learn differently than so there's different ways of learning now. And instead of trying to again smash everything into the way it's supposed to be, and this is how we've always done it. Well, no, it's just not working. So
Mhm.
can we stop demonizing the different types of learning and work together? I think we could get a lot done if we could. But remember, If all you do is demonize each other, you don't get anything done.
True words. If people want to learn more about your campaign, where can they go?
So you can go to my website. It's Lois, FORPA 50 at gmail.com. That is my website, and you can take a look at it.
Thank you so much, Lois. And as always, I love interviewing people running for local politics here in Pennsylvania or anywhere around the country. So if you are running for something, please hit me up here on Substack. You can subscribe and send me a message, and we can get an interview set up. And until next time, everyone, as always, please take care of yourselves and each other. Thanks again, Lois. Bye,
Thank you.
everybody.
Bye bye.